president. The Moore campaign, and that's because there is such hostility in this part of the country, in the Deep South, towards the media. They see us as not an, arbiter of truth. They see us as an interest group, and I think that's a cautionary tale.
It does seem to me, Kevin, that one lesson that Mitch McConnell had learned kind of the hard way was they were taken by surprise in a lot of previous primary elections, and they wound up with candidates who couldn't win. And it strikes me that if if Roy Moore wins, then those lessons are kind of negated. It's not if you nominated Todd Aiken, for example, who couldn't win, that they won't get through. And I think it may have to do with Heidi's point that the way that people consume information is different.
Yeah, and I don't think it's actually like a regional thing. In the Republican Party, there's incredible distrust on all levels. Like, people you would say that guy's not crazy, but like they really have a lot of distrust in mainstream media because they believe it is incredibly biased. And on campaigns, whenever there's an article that's bad in the New York Times, the first thing I do is send it out to my email list and say, look at what they're saying about us in our campaign. And I use it to raise money. I mean, it's what we do. And so I'm sorry. That's why we did it. So
that predated Donald Trump, by the way. I mean, this play is as old as time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and is that coming back to bite the Republican Party?
I don't think it is. I mean, I think that actually, Roy Moore is just using the playbook, and I don't know that Roy Moore is really actually doing anything.
But Roy Moore wouldn't have won if Luther Strange if people had believed things about Roy Moore, about his past, even before these stories came out. He was viewed as not as credible a candidate as you could have gotten if people had actually believed that.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people in Alabama, though, would tell you that Luther Strange had an uphill climb in this primary to begin with. Luther Strange was a former lobbyist. He was a guy in Washington. He had an uphill climb, and all the money in the world might not have been able to save him in this primary, as evidenced by the fact it didn't.
A lot more on this pivotal race when we come back in just a moment. Alabama's Secretary of State John Merrill is standing by. We're going to talk to him about his party's nominee and trying to read the tea leaves of absentee ballots in one key county. KCDC is coming back live from Washington.
We're here. We're going to have other availabilities. I think I can't remember what day we're in now where Roy Moore is in hiding. He comes out only to be seen as kind of like the groundhog. He comes out ever so often to see whether or not he can see his shadow.
Alabama's Secretary of State John Merrill is predicting voter turnout to be at least 25% for Tuesday's special Senate election between Roy Moore and Doug Jones. That would be a big increase from the 14% who turned out for the Republican runoff in September. That prediction is based on what Merrill describes as a high number of absentee ballots coming in. One place seeing a surge in absentee ballots is Tuscaloosa County, home to the University of Alabama. County election manager says she's seeing 6 times as many absentee ballots as she did during the primary and the runoff, which suggests a pretty high turnout on Tuesday. That could be good news for the Democrat. In his 2012 race for state chief justice, Roy Moore lost the county to Democrat Bob Vance, even though Republican Mitt Romney had beaten President Obama there by more than a 17-point margin. Rural counties are also seeing increases in absentee ballots, which could be a good sign on the flip side for Roy Moore. Joining me now is John Merrill, Alabama's Republican Secretary of State. Sir, thanks very much for taking the time to be with us this evening. Really appreciate it. Want to ask you
Stacey, thank you for allowing me to be your guest.
Thank you. And I want to ask you about your own vote. You say that you cast an absentee ballot for Roy Moore. Do you find the accusations against him to be not credible?
No, my vote has nothing to do with the allegations made by these ladies. And I think it's very important to note, Casey, that this election is not about me. It's about Judge Moore. It's about Doug Jones. And more importantly, it's all about the people of the great state of Alabama. And on Tuesday, the people of Alabama will have their voice heard. But not just the people of Alabama, but the people that choose to participate in the electoral process.
You say that these allegations had nothing to do with your vote. I mean, why do these allegations not matter?
Well, because this this is not about me. It's not about me. It's not about what I choose to do.
But is it not
it's
about the
my
women
family.
who are
it's
saying
about
that
the people of the state of Alabama.
that this man
and that's
molested
why
them
it's so
or
important
harassed
to
them?
just not be lost on what's actually going on here. What our people are having to do is they're having to sort through all kinds of information that's being introduced from a lot of different sources all over the nation and try to determine what they think needs to be given attention when they decide to cast their vote next Tuesday.
So again,
I think it's also very important to realize that we have 3,328,000.
Are you saying that the information is not credible? You're saying this information is not credible?
No, I didn't say that. That's not for me to judge.
Why? I mean, why is it not? Why is it not for you to judge?
It's not for me to judge whether or not those ladies are being sincere or accurate in their description of what occurred, because I'm not a judge. I'm not a member of the jury.
Is it irrelevant to your
that's
vote?
Listening to the proceedings. Those things are not related to my job. My job is simply
Are they related to your vote, sir?
To ensure that we have safe, secure elections with integrity and credibility, to ensure that the people of Alabama, when they vote, that they vote only one time, that their voice is heard and their vote is counted the way they cast it.
So you're saying that this information is not relevant to your job as Secretary of State. Is it relevant to your vote in favor of Roy Moore?
It's only relevant to the people of Alabama as they decide who they want to vote for and why they want to vote for them. That's the most important thing to them. Not about who John Merrill's for or who John Merrill decides to cast his ballot for. It's only about ensuring that we have safe and secure and credible elections for the 3,328,107 registered voters in Alabama. And we want all of them to participate.
Let me ask you about the voter ID law. It's relatively recent in your state.
Yes,
do you have any concerns about its implementation? Have you had complaints submitted to your office about that new law?
No. We're very excited about what we've been able to do, Casey. See, one of the things that we've made a commitment to do in our state is to ensure that each and every eligible U.S. citizen that's a resident of Alabama is registered to vote and has a photo ID. We have registered since January the 19th, 2015, the day I became the Secretary of State, 865,117 new voters in Alabama. We want to ensure that all of them have photo IDs. When people can't go to the mobile units that we take to their counties, or they can't go to the local border registrar's office in each one of the 67 counties, on numerous occasions when it's been presented to us that people can't get out and go to those festivals, those events, those activities, those locations, we've actually gone to their homes and given them photo IDs, because we want everybody to be able to participate at the level that they want to participate.
Sir, do you think that both Doug Jones and Roy Moore are capable of honorably representing Alabama in the United States Senate?
Oh, yes, ma'am. I don't think there's any doubt about it. I have met Doug Jones on a few occasions. I find him to be an honorable person who is well-intentioned and has represented our state well as a U.S. attorney when he was in that role, and I applaud him for his service to our state and our nation in that role. I have known Judge Moore for several years. I found him to be an honorable person who has served our state with a high level of integrity and character, a very dedicated Christian who is solidly founded in conservative principles, and a champion of the Constitution.
Secretary of State John Merrill, thanks very much for your time tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Casey.
Still to come, Politico just named her one of the 18 people in Washington to watch this year on their power list. Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal joins us next. Welcome back to KCDC. We have spent a lot of time here talking about sexual harassment in congressional offices. Now, Trip Gabriel of the New York Times also reports on female lobbyists who have faced sexual coercion. He writes about Vanessa Alarid in New Mexico. Over drinks, she asked a lawmaker for his support for a bill that she was working on. He reportedly replied, quote, "You can have my vote if you have sex with me," Ms. Alarid recalled the lawmaker saying, although he used cruder language to describe sexual intercourse. He told Ms. Alarid that she had the same first name as his wife, so he would not get confused if he called out in bed. Then he kissed Ms. Alarid on the lips, she said. Shocked, Ms. Alarid, who was 32 at the time, pushed him away. When her bill came up on the floor of the New Mexico House of Representatives the next day, it failed by a single vote, including a no from the lawmaker, Representative Thomas Garcia. As Ms. Alarid watched from the House gallery, she said Mr. Garcia blew her a kiss and shrugged his shoulders with his arms spread. Representative Garcia denies those claims. Heidi, you have a news story out about some of this. But I mean, this is we've heard a lot of stories, but this is incredible.
I was struck by the part of that story that said that learning how to deflect advances like this is, in fact, a skill that must be developed by female lobbyists because it is so pervasive, and that access in and of itself is the key to their jobs, that they come upon these situations so much that they have to kind of learn that as a job skill. But here, you know, we're obviously, whether it's congressional aides or lobbyists, we are at a cultural turning point. There's so much more awareness about this, but the question is, long term, are there going to be, and you know this so well, Casey, because you've been doing such great reporting on this issue, those changes within Congress and in the state houses to the actual rules that make this behavior harder? Because, you know, at the time of Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas, a lot of the women who I've talked to, are mentors, many of them are mentors, said, look, it was a similar feeling at that time that we had, that things were really going to change, and the media attention went away. They did not change. So that is the challenge here upon us, is to make sure that the rules are changed so that the culture starts to change too.
Yeah, and in the case of this lobbyist, it can be so hard to even write a policy to try to deal with something like that. So it really, I think, does have to be a cultural shift. You're right. Okay, just ahead, blackballed and babysitting. We're going to talk to the attorney for one former Hill staffer who got an $84,000 settlement from her former boss, but now she can't find work. Plus, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who beat her party's leadership to calling for Congressman John Conyers to resign. We'll talk to her about speaking up despite the political cost. Next.
I don't think Congress is equipped. I don't think they have the tools to do the kind of accountability that the American people are searching for.
That was New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand on Wednesday. This as the House Ethics Committee's investigation into sexual harassment claims against Texas Congressman Blake Farenthold picked up steam on Thursday. The committee announced that the 2-year-old investigation will intensify now that his accuser, Lauren Green, has agreed to appear before the committee. NBC News confirmed that Farenthold reached an $84,000 settlement with Green in 2015. Green's attorney, Les Alderman, joins me now to talk a little bit more about this case. Mr. Alderman, thanks very much for taking the time tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Cassie.
So first of all, I should say that Farenthold has said, quote, "I'm relieved that the Ethics Committee is going to look into this matter and confirm the decision of the Office of Congressional Ethics, which unanimously recommended that the Committee on Ethics dismiss the allegations concerning Representative Farenthold." And for viewers who may not know the exact nuances of this, the Office of Congressional Ethics is separate from the Ethics Committee. They often will recommend one way or the other whether to look into something. But in this case, the Ethics Committee has decided to impanel a subcommittee, which is kind of an escalation of an investigation. Are you and your client, is this a positive step, and what changed to cause this escalation?
Well, I'm not sure what changed to cause the escalation. I think it is a positive step in that it brings this thing hopefully to a conclusion. Ms. Green has agreed to cooperate with the investigators. She'll be giving an interview hopefully before the end of the year and doing whatever she can do to help the Ethics Committee and its staff to come to a decision in the case. And so it can only be a good thing.
What has happened to your client in the aftermath of reaching this settlement? I mean, she's the rare person who put her name to this kind of along the way here in a lawsuit, and she has said in interviews that she's been essentially blackballed from jobs. What was her experience in the aftermath of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody has to remember, she did this in 2013, 2014. She came forward. This was before Me Too. This was before there was this environment of support and really empowerment. And essentially, she was out there alone doing this. It was a very, very tough decision for her to make to come forward. She knew, based on things that she had heard from friends on the Hill, that it was probably going to be very damaging to her career on the Hill. But she had the bravery and the tenacity to go forward with it, even though she knew that there was going to be a media circus around it. And that media circus then did happen. You know, her name was all over the papers. She was getting interview requests all the time, and she's just a very private person. She didn't want that. It just kind of came along with filing a lawsuit. And the result was exactly as she had been warned. She couldn't find another job here in D.C., and then, you know, has been out looking for her next career move for a little while now, and facing some serious difficulty, largely, I believe, as a result of the media attention that she received. You know, nowadays, your next employer is going to Google you before they hire you, and when they see that you filed a lawsuit against a prominent congressperson, they're going to have second thoughts, unfortunately, and that's what's happened, I believe.
The House Speaker Paul Ryan has yet to call for Farenthold to resign his seat in Congress, although the allegations in Ms. Greed's case and the settlement are not dissimilar circumstances from what we learned about John Conyers, who, you know, Nancy Pelosi Democratic leadership eventually called on to step down, and who has now resigned, or retired, I should say, from Congress. Do you and does your client believe that Mr. Farenthold should step down?
Let me just say one thing first, just to correct the record. We've never confirmed nor denied that that settlement payment that's been reported went to my client. There's a confidentiality agreement in the case, and we just can't comment on that. But to the bigger question, I think is, should all of these Congress people who are being accused of sexual harassment, should they have to resign? For me, you know, a one-size-fits-all policy, it works just as well with due process as it does with clothes. You know, a lot of times you're going to get a bad fit. I think that you have to let due process work. I think you have to let the Committee on Ethics actually go through its process, talk to the witnesses, make findings, and then recommend the punishment after considering all that, and actually after considering what their recommendations have been in similar instances in the past, so that we're not having knee-jerk reactions. And what those knee-jerk reactions are going to do is create a backlash that's going to harm the movement. So I think we all need to take a breath, make sure we're doing this the right way, even if that takes a little bit more time. And I think that everybody is going to be better off. The victims, the accused, and the American public, because we're going to have decisions that we can actually have more faith in, because they will be done at the end of a process that hopefully gives everybody a right to be heard.
Attorney for
That's
Lauren
my
Green,
personal opinion.
Well, thank you very much for your time, sir. I really appreciate your thoughts on this.
Thanks so much, Cassie. Take care.
This Farenthold news comes as Senator Al Franken and Congressman Trent Franks and John Conyers have all resigned already amid sexual harassment allegations. Congressman Parilla Jayapal of Washington State was among the first to call for Conyers' resignation and is a co-sponsor of the bill ending forced arbitration of sexual harassment. And she joins me now. Congresswoman, thank you so much for taking the time
tonight. Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. I want to pick up where Mr. Alderman left off, because we are, I think, at a point where we are reckoning with how does this conversation proceed, and how should people be punished in the event that there is bad behavior that's uncovered. Do you think the pendulum has swung too far, or is this really just an equalizing of the scales?
I think it's an equalizing of the scales. Look, I think we've had for decades, maybe more than decades, a lot of these incidents happening all over. Women were not able to come forward at that time. Finally, we're at a place where women are coming forward. The pendulum is swinging. I do think ultimately we're going to have processes within Congress, within the private sector, that really look at all these allegations quickly, transparently, with accountability. But right now, the process that we have is not there. The committees that are empowered to look at these things within Congress simply do not have what they need to really be able to take care of these things quickly. And so there are efforts to try and change that. But I think at this point we have to hold ourselves to a higher moral standard. And when you have, it's true that not one size fits everything, but when you have credible allegations, multiple allegations, you've got outside confirmation, I do think it's incumbent on those lawmakers to step step aside and, allow us to continue to allow the American people to have faith in their elected officials.
Do you see a distinction between what's gone on with John Conyers, with Blake Farenthold, and what happened with Senator Franken? Do you think that what he did was any less bad, should have had a different punishment, or do you agree with those calls?
I think the hard thing is that if you're having a conversation about did he grope a breast or some other part of the body, or how many times did he grope and what circumstances, it's the wrong conversation to have. I think that we are at a place where women need to have the ability to come forward, which they haven't had before, and I think that this could be a watershed moment, but it depends on how we deal with it. If we start to have the pendulum swing too much to the other side again, then I think it's going to be very discouraging for women. I think it's an empowering thing that women are coming forward. I know a couple of the women that were named in that article in the Washington State Senate when I was there. I've heard these stories from lobbyists, and certainly every single one of us as women in various businesses has dealt with these on different levels.
Everyone has a Me Too story.
Everyone has a Me Too story of some kind. And when I speak at press conferences and all the email and letters I've gotten, I would say 95% of them are saying, thank you. Thank you for continuing to speak out on these issues. Thank you for making sure that we address them as a country. And thank you for believing in us, women.
Somebody who was here earlier on the show, I think it was Jeremy Peters, mentioned that there were many, we showed some clips of men defending and saying, hey, this, including Newt Gingrich, who said this was a lynch mob for Al Franken. I can't help but notice that oftentimes women talk about this a little bit differently. We have Nikki Haley talking about this earlier today, asked about it in the context of the president. Take a look.
How do you think people should assess the accusers of the president?
Well, I mean, the same thing is women who accused anyone should be heard. They should be heard and they should be dealt with. And I think we heard from them prior to the election. And I think any woman who has felt violated or felt mistreated in any way, they have every right to speak up.
And does the election mean that's a settled issue?
That's for the people to decide. I know that he was elected, but, women should always feel comfortable coming forward, and we should all be willing to listen to them.
Just strikes me that the tone is much different.
It's very different. And I think that, I wrote a piece for Huffington Post, and at the end I said, to all the guys out there who call themselves feminists, who are proud because they have daughters in the workplace or sisters or whatever, this is the time for you to speak up. In order to make the culture shift we're going to have to make, we need men to be standing up as well, and we need to fundamentally change how we respond to these allegations, because for too long we just haven't believed these women.
And it seems like the other piece of this is more women actually being in positions of power in the
I think
Congress.
It makes a big difference. We have that conversation all the time. In my office, it's hard to imagine some of the things that are being said and done. And there was a lieutenant governor candidate, I think in Michigan, who has an ad that's based all around this. Interesting strategy. But I think it gets to the point that, it was women who broke the story. It has been women who have been continuing to cover the story in a big way. And I think it has been women in the Senate, for example, who really called on Al Franken to step aside. So I do think it matters that we have power and that we're in these halls.
Congressman Jayapal, thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you so
really
much,
appreciate it. We are coming back with much more KCDC in just a moment.
Well, Tyler, I guess you could say that Al Franken is on Santa's naughty list this year.
And what about Roy Moore? Which list is he on?
It's not really a list, it's more of a registry.
Thanks, SNL. So we're going to do quick, I can't believe it's almost 9 o'clock already. We're going to do quick final thoughts with our panel. Kevin, what are you watching for this week in Alabama?
I'm just watching for African-American turnout in kind of that midsection of the state, counties like Montgomery and Jefferson. If you're seeing like high turnout for African-Americans throughout Election Day, I think Doug Jones is in for a big upset. And thank Charles Barkley for his help in the campaign. That's what I say.
Thanks. Heidi, what are you watching for in Alabama?
Not just the African-American turnout, but also what I referred to earlier as the seething soccer mom, whether we're going to see any crossover in any meaningful numbers among moderate Republican women, because of course this is the demographic that we did see some shifts in, for example, in Georgia 6, and this is the demographic that the Democrats already think they have an in with. And if you see the DCCC is already sending out mailers. They're targeting something like 90 House members for failing to, quote unquote, come out and condemn Roy Moore.
And that's, I mean, I think that's what I'm watching for in the kind of the broader perspective, pushing ahead to 2018, is will we see, I mean, Alabama is obviously very different from Virginia, which is basically a blue state. Almost, you would probably argue it's already a blue state, if not purple. And we saw that so much in their gubernatorial election, women essentially standing up. And we've seen it across the map, too, with Virginia, with women candidates stepping up across the board. Yeah,
and I think the fallout is like what happens on that Wednesday, which Vaughn talked a little bit about in his piece, is like how does the Senate react? Does it freeze the Senate even more so, and throughout all the election year, which you're going to have a compressed calendar regardless? Can they get anything done, or is it just going to drain all of the issues and all of the time for people campaigning?
Well, and what does Mitch McConnell do if he's got Senator Roy Moore? I mean, that's, I feel like, going to consume the early part of the year.
Stick to the promise that he made, which I think we asked him as recently as this week. What are you going to do if you changed your position? No, there will be an ethics investigation. Well, then how much oxygen is that going to get, and how much is that going to take away from other agenda items they're trying to push? Every time there's a new revelation that kind of confirms everything that the Washington Post has already reported, how much airtime does that get?
Quite a bit. Thank you both so much. That has to do it for us tonight here on KCDC. Thanks to all of you for tuning in, and thank you to all of the dogs out there, especially tonight our featured canine, Eric Coulson's dog, seen here. Eric, you got to tell us your dog's name. We love it. Join us again next week from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern. Good night from Washington.